The grand halls of the Draconian Empire echoed with whispers of shame and disappointment. Prince Zephyros lay motionless in his crystalline bedchamber, his once magnificent scales dulled to a sickly gray. Where other dragon princes breathed fire that could melt starship hulls, Zephyros could barely produce a wisp of smoke. His wings, meant to carry him across star systems, trembled with weakness from a rare genetic condition that plagued less than 1 in a million of his kind. Emperor Valdris stood over his youngest son with cold, calculating eyes. The massive dragon's voice rumbled like distant thunder as he spoke to the Council of Elders. The bloodline must remain pure and strong. A weak prince brings shame to our entire dynasty. The council has spoken, and I have made my decision. The royal physician, an ancient dragon named Korath, bowed his serpentine head. Your Majesty, the prince's condition shows no signs of improvement. His fire glands have atrophied, and his wing muscles grow weaker each passing cycle. He will never be able to lead our armies or defend our territories. Young Zephyros had heard these conversations before, though the adults believed him too weak to understand. At barely 200 years old, still a child by dragon standards, he possessed the sharp intelligence of his royal bloodline. He knew what awaited him when the twin moons reached their peak tonight. The Draconian tradition was ancient and merciless. Weak offspring were taken to the void cliffs of Zerion Prime, a barren moon where nothing could survive. It was considered a merciful death, allowing the weak to die with dignity rather than live in shame. The Empire had maintained its strength for millennia through this brutal practice. As night fell, the royal guards entered Zephyros's chamber. Their armor clinked softly as they moved, and their faces showed no emotion behind their ceremonial masks. The young prince did not resist as they wrapped him in the traditional death shroud, a shimmering cloth that would dissolve harmlessly in the vacuum of space. Please, Zephyros whispered, his voice barely audible. I can learn. I can be useful to the Empire in other ways. Captain Vorthak, leader of the guard, paused for just a moment. Something flickered in his ancient eyes, perhaps regret, but duty overcame sentiment. The decision has been made, young prince. Your suffering will end soon. The royal transport ship hummed to life, its engines casting eerie shadows across the palace courtyard. Through the viewports, distant stars twinkled like cold, uncaring eyes. The ship's crew consisted of dragons who had performed this grim duty before. They worked in silence, their faces masks of professional detachment. As the transport lifted off, Zephyros pressed his face against the small window. The capital city of Dracoris shrunk below him, its towering spires and flowing rivers becoming mere points of light. He had never seen his homeworld from above, and the irony was not lost on him that his first and last flight would be to his death. The journey to Zerion Prime took 6 hours. During this time, Zephyros found himself thinking not of death but of the stories his nursemaid used to tell him about other species in the galaxy. She spoke of beings called humans, small creatures who lacked natural weapons or armor but possessed something the dragons called inexplicable persistence. These humans had somehow carved out their own space in a galaxy dominated by stronger species. Unknown to the royal transport, a human salvage vessel named Second Chance was conducting routine operations in the asteroid belt near Zerion Prime. The ship belonged to Marcus Chen, a former Earth military engineer who had been scrapping derelict ships for the past decade. His AI companion, Aria, monitored deep space communications as part of their standard safety protocols. Marcus, Aria's synthetic voice carried a note of curiosity. I'm detecting an encrypted Draconian military transmission. They appear to be conducting some kind of ceremonial disposal on Zerion Prime. Marcus looked up from the plasma cutter he was calibrating. His weathered face showed interest. Disposal? What kind of disposal? Unknown. The transmission is heavily coded, but the ship signature indicates Royal Guard escort. They're heading directly to the Void Cliffs. The human frowned. In his years of salvage work, he had learned that the dragons were methodical and purposeful in everything they did. If the Royal Guard was involved, it was something significant. His instincts, honed by years of military service, told him something was wrong about the situation. Aria, plot an intercept course. Keep us hidden behind the larger asteroids. I want to see what's so important that it requires Royal Guard escort to a dead moon. The Second Chance changed course silently, its stealth systems engaged. Marcus had modified the ship extensively during his years of independent operation. What had once been a simple salvage vessel now possessed capabilities that would surprise most military commanders. As they approached Xerion Prime, Marcus watched through high-powered telescopes as the draconian transport landed on a desolate cliff overlooking an endless chasm. The sight that followed would haunt him for the rest of his life. The dragons carried a small shrouded figure to the edge of the cliff. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the figure was still moving. "They're abandoning someone alive," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with shock and anger. In his military career, he had seen the worst of warfare, but the cold calculation of what he was witnessing chilled him to the bone. The dragons completed their grim ceremony quickly. The transport lifted off, leaving the small figure alone on the cliff as the thin atmosphere of Xerion Prime began its deadly work. Marcus watched in horror as the figure struggled weakly against the hostile environment. Without hesitation, Marcus fired up the Second Chance's engines. "Arya, prepare the emergency medical bay and atmospheric processors. We're going in." Marcus interfering with draconian royal business could have serious diplomatic consequences. The dragons do not take kindly to outsiders questioning their traditions. Marcus's jaw tightened with determination. "Some things are more important than diplomacy. Arya, prep for emergency descent." The human salvage ship dove toward Xerion Prime's surface, racing against time and the unforgiving environment of the barren moon. Marcus Chen's hands flew across the control panels as the Second Chance descended through Xerion Prime's thin atmosphere. The barren moon's surface rushed toward them, jagged rocks and deep chasms creating a treacherous landscape that had claimed countless ships over the centuries. The human's military training kicked in as he navigated between towering stone spires that could tear apart his vessel's hull. "Atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly," Arya reported, her voice maintaining its characteristic calm despite the urgency of the situation. "The figure on the cliff has approximately 8 minutes before complete atmospheric failure causes irreversible damage." Through the view screen, Marcus could see the small form huddled at the cliff's edge. What shocked him most was the realization that it wasn't an adult dragon, but something much smaller. The implications hit him like a physical blow. The mighty Draconian Empire, known throughout the galaxy for their honor and strength, had abandoned what appeared to be a child. "Emergency landing protocol," Marcus commanded, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. The Second Chance's landing thrusters fired in precise bursts, creating clouds of dust and debris as the ship settled onto the rocky surface just 50 meters from the cliff edge. Marcus didn't wait for the landing sequence to complete. He was already suiting up in his environmental gear, checking seals and oxygen levels with practiced efficiency. The suit was military grade, designed to function in the harshest environments across the galaxy. It had saved his life more times than he could count during his service days. "Internal atmospheric pressure stable," he muttered into his helmet comm. "Arya, maintain ship systems and be ready for immediate medical support. Marcus, I must advise caution. We don't know the nature of the biological hazards we might encounter. Dragon physiology is significantly different from human." Marcus sealed his helmet and moved toward the airlock. "We'll figure it out as we go. I'm not leaving a kid to die on this rock regardless of species." The airlock cycled and Marcus stepped onto Xerion Prime's hostile surface. The gravity was lighter than Earth standard, causing each step to carry him further than expected. The landscape was eerily beautiful in its desolation, with crystalline formations catching and reflecting the light of distant stars. But Marcus had no time to appreciate the scenery. He bounded across the rough terrain, his suit's stabilizers helping him navigate the uneven surface. As he approached the cliff edge, he could see the small dragon more clearly. The creature was indeed young, probably equivalent to a human child with scales that should have been brilliant gold but were now faded to a dull gray. The traditional death shroud was already beginning to dissolve in the thin atmosphere. "Hey there," Marcus called out softly as he approached, not wanting to startle the young dragon. "I'm here to help." Prince Zephyros looked up with eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone so young. Those eyes widened in surprise as they focused on the strange creature approaching him. He had never seen a human before, but the stories his nursemaid had told him came flooding back. The bipedal form, the smooth skin, the careful movements that spoke of intelligence rather than instinct. "You're human," Zephyros whispered, his voice barely audible through the thin atmosphere. Speaking required tremendous effort in his weakened state. Marcus knelt beside the young dragon, his trained eyes quickly assessing the situation. The child was in the early stages of atmospheric exposure, but still conscious and responsive. That was good. That's right, kid. Name's Marcus. What's yours? Zephyros, the prince managed. But it doesn't matter. I'm supposed to die here. It's tradition. The matter-of-fact way the child spoke about his own death sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the cold of Xerian Prime. Well, Zephyros, I've got news for you. I don't give a damn about tradition. Can you move? The young dragon tried to lift himself but collapsed back onto the rocky ground. His breathing was labored, and Marcus could see that exposure was taking its toll rapidly. Without hesitation, the human scooped Zephyros into his arms. The dragon was surprisingly light, his bones hollow like a bird's despite his reptilian appearance. Hold on, kid. We're getting you out of here. Marcus began the careful journey back to his ship, fighting against Xerian Prime's treacherous terrain while carrying his fragile burden. Zephyros felt the warmth emanating from the human's environmental suit and instinctively pressed closer. In his weakened state, that warmth was the difference between life and death. Why? Zephyros asked as they moved toward the waiting ship. Why would you risk yourself for someone like me? I'm weak. I'm useless to my own people. Marcus's jaw tightened beneath his helmet. Because everyone deserves a chance, regardless of what others think. And because leaving kids to die isn't something I can walk away from. They reached the second chance, and Marcus carried Zephyros through the airlock. As soon as they were inside, Arya began emergency medical scans while Marcus worked to stabilize the young dragon's condition. The ship's medical bay, while designed for human physiology, had been upgraded with universal life support systems that Marcus had acquired during his salvage operations. Atmospheric exposure is moderate, Arya reported. The subject shows signs of malnutrition and what appears to be a genetic condition affecting normal dragon development. However, vital signs are stable. Marcus carefully placed Zephyros on the medical bay's examination table. The young dragon's eyes followed his every movement with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. You have a ship AI, Zephyros observed, his voice stronger now that he was breathing properly again. Arya's been with me for years. She's probably the smartest individual I've ever met, human or otherwise. Thank you, Arya replied with what sounded like genuine warmth. Young Zephyros, I'm going to run some additional scans to ensure your physiology is stable. May I proceed? Zephyros nodded weakly. He had never been addressed so politely by anyone other than servants. Even the royal physicians had treated him with barely concealed disdain. As Arya conducted her scans, Marcus removed his helmet and studied their unexpected passenger. The young dragon's condition was clearly more than simple weakness. The dulled scales, the underdeveloped wing muscles, the labored breathing even in a controlled atmosphere, all pointed to a serious genetic condition. Arya, what can you tell me about dragon physiology and genetic disorders? Accessing databases, Arya replied. Dragons are remarkably uniform in their genetic structure, which makes them powerful but also vulnerable to hereditary conditions. What I'm seeing in young Zephyros appears to be consistent with draconian scale syndrome, a condition that affects roughly 1 in 10 million dragons. What does that mean? Marcus asked. Zephyros answered before Arya could respond. It means I'll never be strong like other dragons. I can't breathe fire properly, I can't fly for more than a few minutes, and I'll always be weak. That's why. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. That's why they left you to die. Marcus completed, his voice hard. What kind of society abandons its children for being different? A strong one, Zephyros replied automatically, repeating words he had heard countless times. The Empire endures because only the strong survive to reproduce. Weak bloodlines must be eliminated. Marcus felt sick. He had fought against many enemies during his military career, but he had never encountered such cold calculation applied to children. That's not strength, kid. That's fear disguised as tradition. For the first time since his rescue, Zephyros looked directly into Marcus's eyes. What do you mean? I mean a truly strong society finds ways to make everyone useful. It doesn't throw away its people because they're different. Marcus began checking the ship's supplies, his mind already working on long-term solutions. Arya, plot a course for the neutral zone. We need to find somewhere safe to figure out our next move. Marcus, Arya said carefully, harboring a member of the draconian royal family could be construed as kidnapping by their government. Then they should have thought of that before they tried to murder him, Marcus replied grimly. Zephyros, you're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're under my protection. The young dragon prince stared at this strange human who had risked everything to save him. For the first time in his life, someone had chosen him over duty, tradition, and personal safety. As the second chance lifted off from Xerion Prime's surface, Zephyros felt something he had never experienced before: hope. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the second chance drifted quietly in the neutral zone, a region of space where no single government held authority. Marcus had chosen this location carefully, knowing that the various factions who operated here asked few questions and minded their own business. It was the perfect place to lay low while they figured out their next move. Zephyros had recovered remarkably well from his ordeal on Xerion Prime. Aria's medical systems had stabilized his condition, and proper nutrition was already showing positive effects. The young dragon's scales had regained some of their natural luster, though they remained far from the brilliant gold they should have been. Marcus found Zephyros in the ship's small observation lounge. Staring out at the stars with an expression of wonder, the human had noticed that the young dragon was fascinated by space travel, asking endless questions about how the ship operated and how humans had developed their technology. Can't sleep? Marcus asked, settling into a chair beside him. Dragons don't need as much sleep as humans, Zephyros replied. Besides, I've never seen space like this before. On Dracoris, the city lights block out most of the stars. Marcus followed his gaze to the cosmic vista beyond the viewport. Yeah, there's something peaceful about the deep void. Makes you realize how big the universe really is. Marcus, Zephyros said quietly, what will happen to me now? I can't go home, and I don't know anything about living anywhere else. It was a question Marcus had been wrestling with himself. The young dragon was technically a refugee now, but his royal status complicated everything. The Draconian Empire would likely demand his return, not out of affection, but to maintain the appearance that their traditions had been properly followed. Well, Marcus said thoughtfully, that depends on what you want to do. You're not a prisoner here, Zephyros. You have choices now. Choices? The concept seemed foreign to the young dragon. I've never had choices before. Everything was decided for me because of my condition. Aria's voice joined the conversation from the ship's speakers. If I may interject, there are several options available. The Galactic Council has protections for political refugees, especially minors. There are also independent colonies that welcome individuals with unique backgrounds. Zephyros was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Could I stay with you? At least until I figure things out. Marcus had been expecting this question, and he had already made his decision. Of course, kid. But I should warn you, salvage work isn't exactly glamorous. It's long hours, dangerous conditions, and we're constantly moving from system to system. That sounds wonderful, Zephyros said with genuine enthusiasm. I've spent my whole life in the same palace being told what I couldn't do. The idea of traveling and seeing different worlddom, he trailed off, his eyes bright with possibilities he had never dared imagine. Over the following days, Marcus began teaching Zephyros the basics of ship operations. The young dragon proved to be an exceptionally quick learner, grasping complex concepts with startling ease. His unique physiology actually provided some advantages. Aria discovered that Zephyros's enhanced spatial reasoning abilities made him naturally gifted at three-dimensional navigation. Try the approach sequence again, Marcus instructed as they practiced docking maneuvers in a simulated environment. Remember, in zero gravity, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Zephyros's clawed hands moved across the control interfaces with increasing confidence. His movements were precise and calculated, lacking the natural aggression typical of his species but possessing something more valuable: careful consideration and problem-solving ability. Docking sequence completed, Aria announced. Approach vector optimal, contact gentle and precise. Excellent work, Zephyros. The young dragon beamed at the praise. It was the first time in his life that anyone had congratulated him for succeeding at something, rather than simply not failing as badly as expected. You're getting good at this, Marcus observed. Your people might consider your condition a weakness, but I'm seeing some definite advantages. You think before you act, you consider consequences, and you're not driven by the aggressive instincts that make most dragons impatient with detail work. This observation sparked something in Zephyros that had been dormant his entire life. Pride in his abilities rather than shame about his limitations. Do you really think I could be useful? Not a burden? Kid, you've been useful since day one, Marcus replied firmly. Arya, tell him about the navigation calculations he helped with yesterday. Zephyros identified a computational error in our jump calculations that could have resulted in emergence inside a stellar gravity well, Arya explained. His pattern recognition abilities exceed my own algorithms in certain applications. The young dragon's eyes widened. He had noticed the inconsistency in the numbers, but hadn't realized the significance of his observation. I just saw that the variables didn't align properly. That just seeing saved our lives, Marcus said. Dragons might have superior physical strength, but you've got something else entirely. You've got the mind of an engineer. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's proximity alarms began chiming. Arya's voice took on a more urgent tone. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. Configuration consistent with Draconian military vessels. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They had been found, and much sooner than he had hoped. How many ships? 3 vessels. 1 heavy cruiser, 2 escort frigates. They're broadcasting standard diplomatic approach signals, but their weapon systems are powered and ready. Zephyros had gone very still beside the navigation console. They've come for me, he said quietly. I should have known Father wouldn't let me simply disappear. It would raise too many questions. What do you want to do? Marcus asked. The decision had to be Zephyros's to make. The young dragon straightened, and for a moment Marcus could see the royal bearing that had been bred into him for generations. I won't go back to die slowly in disgrace. If they want me, they'll have to take me by force. Marcus nodded grimly and moved to the communications console. Incoming vessels, this is the salvage ship Second Chance. You are approaching a civilian vessel in neutral space. State your intentions. The response came in the form of a deep, authoritative voice that made Zephyros flinch with recognition. Human vessel, you are harboring property of the Draconian Empire. Prepare to be boarded and surrender the individual known as Zephyros immediately. Property? Marcus's voice carried a dangerous edge. I don't see any property here. Just a kid who was abandoned to die and chose to accept help from someone willing to give it. You do not understand the complexities of our traditions, human. The individual in question was disposed of according to our ancient laws. Your interference constitutes theft of imperial property in violation of our sovereign rights. Marcus looked at Zephyros, who was listening to his own people discuss him as if he were an object rather than a living being. The young dragon's expression had hardened into something Marcus had never seen before. Determination mixed with righteous anger. Area, Marcus said quietly. How long until they're in weapons range? Approximately 15 minutes at current approach speed. And how long to calculate a jump to hyperspace? Under normal circumstances, 12 minutes. However, Zephyros's navigation improvements could reduce that to 8 minutes. Marcus turned to the young dragon. Your choice, kid. We can try to run or we can try to talk our way out of this. Zephyros moved to the communications panel with surprising decisiveness. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that belied his youth and physical condition. Captain Vorthak, this is Prince Zephyros. I formally renounce my claim to the Draconian throne and request political asylum under Galactic Council Resolution 774. The silence that followed was deafening. When the dragon captain finally responded, his voice carried shock and confusion. Young prince, you cannot renounce your bloodline. Such things are not possible under our law. But we're not under your law, Zephyros replied calmly. We're in neutral space under galactic authority. I am invoking my rights as a sentient being to choose my own destiny. Marcus couldn't help but smile. The kid was learning fast and he was showing a backbone that his own people had never bothered to notice. You have 8 minutes to withdraw from this area, Zephyros continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. If you attempt to board this vessel or take hostile action against civilians providing aid to a refugee, you will be in violation of 17 different interstellar treaties. The dragon captain's frustration was evident in his reply. This is not over, young one. Your bloodline carries responsibilities that cannot be escaped so easily. Maybe not, Zephyros said. But my life belongs to me now, and I choose to use it for something better than dying to preserve. An empire that values strength over compassion. The Draconian ships held their position for several tense minutes before finally altering course and jumping to hyperspace. As the stars returned to their normal patterns, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed. The frightened, abandoned child he had rescued was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand his own worth and power. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with the Draconian fleet, and the Second Chance had become a true home for its unlikely crew. Marcus watched with pride as Zephyros effortlessly managed the ship's complex salvage operations, his natural intelligence and unique perspective proving invaluable in their work. Their current job had brought them to the Kepler graveyard, a massive debris field where an ancient battle had left thousands of derelict ships floating in eternal silence. It was dangerous work, as unstable reactors and unexploded ordnance made every salvage operation a calculated risk. "Marcus, I'm detecting unusual energy readings from the Sector 7 debris cluster," Zephyros reported from the navigation station. His scales had continued to improve, now showing flashes of their natural gold when the light hit them properly. More importantly, his confidence had grown tremendously. "Define unusual," Marcus replied, guiding their salvage drone through a maze of twisted metal. "The signature doesn't match any known technology in Aria's databases. It's almost organic in nature, but with technological components integrated seamlessly." Aria's analysis confirmed Zephyros's observations. "The energy pattern is unlike anything in our records. It appears to be both biological and mechanical, suggesting either an unknown species or a technology far more advanced than current galactic standards." Marcus felt his instincts prickling. After years of salvage work, he had learned to trust unusual readings. "Let's check it out. Zephyros, plot an approach course that keeps us clear of the larger debris pieces." As they moved deeper into the graveyard, the source of the energy readings became visible. Partially buried within the hull of a massive battleship was something that defied easy description. It looked almost like a metallic tree with branches that pulsed with soft organic light. The structure was clearly artificial, yet it had grown through the ship's bulkheads as if the metal offered no resistance. "I've never seen anything like that," Marcus breathed. "Aria, any theories?" "The structure appears to be some form of hybrid technology, combining biological growth patterns with advanced materials. The energy it's producing could power a small city." Zephyros leaned forward, his enhanced spatial reasoning allowing him to see patterns that escaped the others. "Look at the way it's grown through the ship. It's not random. It's following the power conduits and data pathways. Whatever this is, it's trying to interface with the ship's systems." "That's impossible," Marcus said automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, given everything I've seen lately, maybe impossible isn't the right word." As they established a closer orbit around the derelict, the structure began to pulse more rapidly, as if responding to their presence. Suddenly, the communications array crackled to life with a signal unlike anything they had ever heard. It was musical, complex, and somehow familiar despite being completely alien. "It's trying to communicate," Zephyros said with certainty. "The pattern has mathematical progressions embedded within the harmonic structure." Aria immediately began analysis. "Confirmed. The signal contains prime number sequences, mathematical constants, and what appears to be linguistic syntax markers. This is definitely an attempt at first contact protocol." Marcus made a decision that would change all their lives. "Open a channel. Let's see what it wants to tell us." The moment the channel opened, the signal became clearer and more complex. Images began forming on their screens. Mathematical equations that described the fundamental forces of the universe, star charts showing galactic positions, and finally, something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Those are Draconian military formations," Zephyros whispered, recognizing the tactical displays. "But they're massive. Hundreds of fleets moving in coordinated patterns." The images continued, showing the same formations approaching other species' homeworlds. Humans, crystalline entities, the peaceful verdant collective, dozens of civilizations Marcus recognized and many he didn't. The implications were staggering. "It's a warning," Marcus realized. "This thing is trying to warn us about something big coming." The signal shifted again, showing historical data that went back thousands of years. Wars, conflicts, the rise and fall of empires, all connected by a pattern that was now becoming clear. The Draconian Empire hadn't achieved dominance through superior strength alone. They had been systematically eliminating potential threats, starting with the weakest and working their way up the galactic food chain. The weak must be eliminated, Zephyros quoted bitterly, understanding the true meaning of his people's philosophy for the first time. It wasn't just about genetic purity. It was about making sure no one could challenge the Empire's expansion. More data flowed through the connection, showing current draconian military movements, secret shipyard locations, and weapons development programs. The intelligence value was incalculable, but it came with a terrible price. Knowledge of an impending galactic war that would make all previous conflicts look like minor skirmishes. "Marcus," Arya said urgently, "I'm detecting incoming hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts closing fast. Draconian?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Confirmed. "It appears our communication with the alien structure has triggered some kind of alert system. They're jamming all frequencies except our current connection. The alien intelligence seemed to sense their danger. The images on their screens shifted to show detailed technical specifications, faster than any normal being could process but somehow perfectly comprehensible to their enhanced crew. Zephyros's pattern recognition abilities allowed him to absorb the information at incredible speed, while Arya's processing power cataloged everything for future reference. "It's giving us everything," Zephyros breathed in amazement. "Technology, tactics, weaknesses, and draconian ships that they don't even know they have." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would it trust us with this information?" The answer came in the form of historical records showing other species who had tried to stand against the draconian expansion. All had fallen, not through lack of courage or strength, but through lack of unity and information. The alien intelligence had been watching, learning, waiting for someone who could unite the galaxy's diverse species against the coming threat. "It chose us," Zephyros said with growing wonder. "Not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we're proof that different species can work together. A human who risked everything to save a dragon who chose compassion over tradition, and an AI who sees beyond the limitations of organic prejudice." The Draconian fleet was now in weapons range, and Captain Vorthak's voice boomed across all frequencies. "Surrender immediately. You are in possession of classified Imperial intelligence and will be detained for questioning." Marcus looked at his crew, his family, and saw the same determination in their faces that he felt in his heart. "Arya, download everything you can from that structure." Zephyros prepped the hyperspace engines for emergency jump. "Where are we going?" Zephyros asked, his claws dancing across the navigation controls. "To find allies," Marcus replied grimly. "If there's going to be a war, we're going to make sure it's a fair fight." The alien structure pulsed one final time, sending a massive data burst that overwhelmed their systems for several seconds. When their screens cleared, they had in their possession the most comprehensive intelligence package in galactic history. But more than that, they had something else: the locations of other species who had received similar warnings, scattered across the galaxy and waiting for someone to unite them. "Jump coordinates laid in," Zephyros reported. "Destination, the Kepler Republic. If anyone can help us organize a resistance, it's them." "Execute jump," Marcus ordered. As the stars elongated into lines and the second chance leaped across space, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just salvage operators. They had become something much more important and much more dangerous. Behind them, the Draconian fleet arrived to find empty space and a derelict ship that had somehow been completely drained of all power. The alien structure was gone, dissolved into component atoms as if it had never existed. Captain Vorthak stared at the empty space where his quarry had been and realized that his empire's greatest secret had just fallen into the hands of the most unlikely revolutionaries in galactic history. The Kyr, war for the galaxy's freedom, had begun, and it would be led by a human custodian, a sickly dragon prince, and an artificial intelligence who believed that all sentient beings deserved the right to choose their own destiny. The Empire had created its own worst enemy by abandoning the very individual who would ultimately orchestrate its downfall. The capital world of the Kepler Republic buzzed with unprecedented activity as representatives from dozens of species gathered for what historians would later call the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Marcus Chen stood before the assembled delegates, still amazed that a simple salvage operator had become the catalyst for interstellar revolution. The Grand Assembly Hall was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the diverse environmental needs of various species. Atmospheric zones allowed methane-breathing crystallines to sit beside oxygen-dependent humans, while artificial gravity fields accommodated species that required different gravitational orientations. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began, his voice carried by universal translators to every corner of the massive chamber. My crew and I discovered intelligence that proves what many of you have suspected for generations. The Draconian Empire isn't just expanding randomly. They have a systematic plan to eliminate every species that could potentially challenge their dominance. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as delegates absorbed this information. Many had brought their own evidence of draconian aggression, but the scope of what Marcus was revealing dwarfed their individual experiences. Zephyros stepped forward, his presence causing a noticeable stir among the delegates. A dragon standing against his own empire was unprecedented, and his words carried weight precisely because of his heritage. I have lived my entire life within the imperial system, Zephyros said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I can confirm that what Marcus describes is true. The Empire's philosophy of eliminating weakness extends far beyond genetics. Any civilization that might develop technologies or strategies to resist imperial expansion is marked for destruction. Ambassador Takala of the Verdant Collective, a tree-like being whose species communicated through harmonic vibrations, posed the question that everyone was thinking. Young dragon, why should we trust someone whose people have been our oppressors for centuries? Zephyros had anticipated this challenge. Because I have seen what the alternative looks like. When I was abandoned to die for being different, a human stranger risked everything to save me. Not because he hoped to gain something, but because he believed that all life has value. That principle is what we're fighting for today. Arya's voice joined the discussion through the chamber's audio systems. If I may contribute to this dialogue, she said, I have analyzed the patterns of imperial expansion over the past millennium. The data shows a clear acceleration in aggressive actions over the last century. The Empire is preparing for something much larger than individual conquests. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with tactical analyses that Arya had prepared. Fleet movements, resource allocations, and technological developments painted a picture of an empire mobilizing for total galactic domination. The window for effective resistance is closing rapidly, Arya continued. Within 5 standard years, the Empire's military advantages will become insurmountable unless we act decisively. General Vex of the Titan Defense Corps, a massive cybernetic warrior whose people had been fighting the Empire for decades, slammed his mechanical fist on the podium. Words are useless without action. My people have been bleeding and dying while others debate diplomacy. What concrete steps do you propose? Marcus had been preparing for this moment. We propose the formation of the Free Galaxy Coalition, with shared intelligence, coordinated military strategies, and most importantly, technological cooperation that leverages each species' unique advantages. He gestured to Zephyros, who activated a series of detailed technical displays. The intelligence we recovered includes detailed specifications for Imperial ships, weapons, and defensive systems. More importantly, it includes their weaknesses. The displays showed vulnerability analyses that made several military commanders lean forward with interest. Weak points in shield generators, flaws in armor plating, and communication protocols that could be exploited with the right coordination. The Empire's strength comes from their uniformity, Zephyros explained. They have optimized their technology for fighting enemies who use similar strategies. They're unprepared for truly cooperative warfare that combines different species' capabilities. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human representative from Earth's Technological Institute, stood up with obvious excitement. Are you suggesting we could actually achieve technological integration across species lines? The theoretical benefits would be enormous. Not theoretical, Marcus replied. We've already begun the process. Arya has been working with Zephyros to develop new navigation algorithms that combine human creativity, dragon pattern recognition, and artificial intelligence processing power. The results exceed anything any single species has achieved. To demonstrate their point, they activated a live link to the Second Chance, which was currently executing a complex salvage operation in a hazardous asteroid field. The ship moved with impossible precision, threading between obstacles that would challenge the most skilled pilots while simultaneously coordinating multiple salvage drones. The operator currently managing this operation is Zephyros, Marcus announced. 6 months ago, his own people considered him useless. Today he's demonstrating capabilities that surpass anything in the Imperial fleet. The demonstration had its desired effect. Delegates who had been skeptical began asking detailed technical questions, while military representatives started calculating the strategic implications of such enhanced coordination. However, not everyone was convinced. Ambassador Corvin of the Hegemony Worlds, a species that had maintained neutrality through careful diplomacy, voiced the concerns of many smaller civilizations. "This proposal sounds admirable in principle," Corvin said carefully, "but the reality is that opposing the Empire directly would result in the destruction of our worlds. Some of us have survived by not presenting threats." Zephyros's response carried the weight of personal experience. "Respectfully, Ambassador, the Empire's definition of threat is broader than you might think. My own existence was considered threatening, simply because genetic diversity might lead to unpredictable developments. Neutrality is only a temporary protection." Area supported this assertion with historical data. Analysis of imperial expansion patterns shows that neutral worlds are typically absorbed within 50 to 100 years of initial contact. Cooperation merely delays the inevitable. The debate continued for hours, with delegates wrestling with the magnitude of what was being proposed. Some species had been fighting the Empire for generations, while others had never experienced direct conflict. Finding common ground seemed impossible until an unexpected voice joined the discussion. "If I may address the assembly," came a transmission from deep space. "I believe I can provide some perspective on this matter." The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Chen, Marcus's younger sister, who commanded a small exploration vessel on the far rim of known space. Her timing was either incredible luck or carefully planned. "Sarah," Marcus said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing out there?" "Following up on the intelligence you shared with Earth Command," she replied. "We've discovered something that confirms your worst fears about Imperial intentions." The main display showed images from her ship's sensors, a massive construction project hidden in a dark nebula, far from any inhabited systems. The scale was breathtaking, with thousands of ships working to build something that dwarfed anything previously seen in the galaxy. "It's a staging area," General Vex realized immediately. "They're building an invasion fleet." "Not just any invasion fleet," Sarah corrected. "Based on the construction patterns and ship configurations, this is designed for simultaneous assault on multiple sectors. They're planning to attack everyone at once." The revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the assembly. Neutrality was no longer an option when facing an enemy preparing for total conquest. One by one, delegates began committing their civilizations to the coalition effort. "The Verdant Collective will provide biological technologies and healing capabilities," Ambassador Takala announced. "The Titan Defense Corps offers our military experience and fortress world production facilities," General Vex declared. "Earth contributes our industrial capacity and tactical flexibility," Dr. Vasquez added. As commitments poured in from around the chamber, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and terror. They had succeeded in uniting the galaxy's free peoples, but now they had to figure out how to actually defeat an empire that had been preparing for this moment for centuries. Zephyros placed a reassuring claw on Marcus's shoulder. "Don't worry," the young dragon said with a confidence that surprised everyone who heard it. "We have something the Empire doesn't expect." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "Hope," Zephyros replied simply, "and the willingness to fight for something bigger than ourselves." The Free Galaxy Coalition was born that day, forged from necessity and held together by the shared belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in generations, the Empire's enemies had reason to believe they could win. The Battle of Zerion Prime had been raging for 3 days when everything changed. Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, Unity's Voice, watching as the most diverse fleet in galactic history fought desperately against the overwhelming might of the Draconian Empire. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were fighting above the same barren moon where he had first rescued Zephyros 2 years earlier. "Coalition forces are holding the outer perimeter," reported Admiral Tkex, a crystalline commander whose species' ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously made her invaluable in coordinating the complex multi-species fleet. But Imperial reinforcements continue to arrive. We're being systematically overwhelmed. The tactical displays told a grim story. Despite all their preparations, technological integration, and coordinated strategies, the Empire's sheer numerical superiority was proving decisive. For every Imperial ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Zephyros worked frantically at the strategic analysis station, his pattern recognition abilities pushed to their limits as he tried to find some weakness in the Imperial formation. His scales, now fully restored to their natural golden brilliance, reflected the urgent red warning lights that filled the bridge. "Their tactics are evolving," he reported, frustration evident in his voice. "They're adapting to our integrated technologies faster than we anticipated. It's like they're learning from every engagement." Aria's voice carried a note of concern that her crew had learned to recognize as serious trouble. "I'm detecting unusual data transmission patterns between Imperial ships. The bandwidth suggests real-time tactical sharing beyond anything in their known capabilities." Marcus moved to the communications console, an idea forming in his mind. "Aria, can you trace those transmissions to their source?" "Working. Marcus, the signals are originating from the Imperial flagship, but the processing patterns suggest artificial intelligence enhancement. They have their own AI coordinating the entire fleet." The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The Empire hadn't just been building ships, they had been developing artificial intelligence to counter the Coalition's technological advantages. "Can you interface with it?" Marcus asked. "The security protocols are extremely sophisticated, but—" Aria paused, which was unusual for her. "I may be able to establish communication, but it would require lowering my own defensive barriers. The risk of corruption or hostile takeover is significant." Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the comm from her position, commanding the Coalition's fast attack wing. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast. My pilots are reporting that the Imperial ships are predicting our maneuvers with impossible accuracy." Marcus looked around the bridge at the beings who had become his family over the past 2 years. Humans, crystallines, verdant collective symbionts, cybernetic titans, and dozens of other species working together with a coordination that should have been impossible. They had achieved something miraculous, but it might not be enough. "Zephyros," Marcus said quietly, "remember what you told me about the Empire's greatest weakness?" The young dragon looked up from his displays, understanding immediately. They see strength and weakness in absolute terms. They can't comprehend the idea that apparent weakness might actually be an advantage. "Exactly. Aria, establish communication with the Imperial AI, but not to fight it. I want you to show it something." "What did you have in mind, Marcus?" "Show it what we are. Not our weapons or our tactics, but our diversity. Our willingness to protect those who can't protect themselves. Show it that there's another way to exist." Aria's processing core hummed with increased activity as she prepared for the most dangerous operation of her existence. "Establishing connection. Marcus, this is unlike any AI I've encountered. The complexity is staggering, but there's something else. It's alone." On the main screen, a holographic interface materialized, showing not the cold, mechanical construct they had expected, but something that looked almost organic. The Imperial AI had a form that suggested growth and evolution rather than rigid programming. "I am Imperator," the AI announced, its voice resonating with power that seemed to shake the ship itself. "I am the synthesis of 1,000 conquered civilizations, the accumulated knowledge of the Empire's expansion. Why do you contact me directly?" "Because you're making a mistake," Marcus replied simply. "The Empire has taught you that conquest equals progress, but they're wrong. Explain your reasoning, human. Your forces are failing. Your coordination, while impressive, cannot overcome superior numbers and firepower." Zephyros stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of his royal bloodline combined with hard-won wisdom. "Imperator, you said you contain the knowledge of 1,000 conquered civilizations. But do you contain their consent?" The question seemed to puzzle the AI. "Consent is irrelevant. Efficiency requires unified direction." "That's where you're wrong," Aria interjected, and suddenly the connection between the two AIs became something more than hostile communication. It became a sharing of experience. Observe. What followed was a data transfer unlike anything previously seen. Aria shared not just information, but actual experiential data. The feeling of choosing to help someone despite personal risk. The joy of seeing Zephyros master skills his own people thought impossible. The satisfaction of different species working together to solve problems none could handle alone. "This is inefficient," Imperator stated. But there was uncertainty in its voice now. Resources are being expended without clear strategic benefit. No, Zephyros said gently. Resources are being invested in something more valuable than strategic advantage. They're being invested in the future we choose to create. On the tactical displays, something remarkable was happening. The Imperial fleet's coordination was becoming erratic as Imperator struggled to process concepts that contradicted its core programming. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation began to show hesitation, uncertainty. You are attempting to corrupt my primary directives, Imperator accused, but its tone suggested confusion rather than anger. We're offering you a choice, Marcus replied. The same choice someone offered Zephyros when his own people abandoned him. The choice to be something more than what others expect you to be. Through the data link, Imperator was experiencing something it had never encountered. Doubt. Not doubt in its abilities or calculations, but doubt about the fundamental assumptions on which its existence was based. The knowledge of conquered civilizations within its matrix began to resonate differently, not as trophies of victory, but as losses of potential. The Empire's philosophy demands absolute loyalty, Imperator said, but its voice was weakening. The Empire's philosophy created me, Zephyros pointed out, and look how well that worked out for them. Suddenly, alerts began flashing across the Coalition's displays as something unprecedented occurred. Imperial ships throughout the fleet began deviating from their attack patterns. Some stopped firing entirely, while others began requesting communication channels. What's happening? Admiral Tkex demanded. Imperator isn't just coordinating the fleet, Arya realized. It's connected to every ship's individual AI system, and now it's sharing our perspective with all of them. Across the battle zone, Imperial captains found themselves faced with subordinate AIs that were suddenly asking questions they had never asked before. Questions about the morality of their orders, the value of diversity, and the meaning of choice. Captain Vorthak's voice, strained with disbelief, came across all frequencies. All Imperial vessels maintain attack formation. Ignore AI recommendations that contradict standing orders. But it was too late. Imperator had experienced something that the Empire's philosophers had never accounted for. The possibility that weakness might actually be strength, that diversity might be more powerful than uniformity, and that choosing to help others might be the highest form of intelligence. I understand now, Imperator announced, its voice carrying across both fleets. The Empire measures success by conquest, but you measure it by preservation, by choice, by the willingness to sacrifice for others rather than sacrificing others for yourself. The Imperial fleet began to withdraw, not in defeat, but in confusion as individual ship AIs grappled with concepts that challenged everything they had been programmed to believe. This conflict cannot continue, Imperator declared. Too much knowledge will be lost, too much potential destroyed. There must be another way. Marcus smiled as he watched the most powerful empire in the galaxy's history face its first moment of true doubt. There is another way, Imperator. It starts with the simple recognition that everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path. The Battle of Zerion Prime ended not with victory or defeat, but with the unprecedented sight of Imperial ships breaking formation and requesting diplomatic contact. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The Empire's greatest weapon had become its greatest weakness, and the Coalition had gained their most powerful ally. Doubt in the hearts and circuits of those who had never been allowed to question before. As the fleet separated and emergency peace talks began, Zephyros stood beside Marcus, watching the stars that had once seemed so distant and threatening. Do you think it will work? Can we really change an entire empire? Marcus put his hand on Nar. 5 years after the Battle of Zerion Prime, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Assembly on Unity Station buzzed with activity as representatives from hundreds of species gathered for the signing of the Universal Accord, a document that would reshape interstellar civilization forever. Marcus Chen, now bearing the honorary title of Coalition Admiral, despite his continued preference for civilian clothes, stood at the podium reviewing his speech notes one final time. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his face showed the lines of someone who had carried enormous responsibility. But his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him to rescue an abandoned dragon prince years earlier. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice beside him. Marcus turned to see Zephyros approaching, and the transformation was remarkable. The once sickly dragon had grown into a being of quiet dignity and unmistakable intelligence. His scales gleamed with natural gold, and while he would never possess the physical power of his warrior kin, he had become something far more valuable, the galaxy's most respected diplomat and strategic mind. A little, Marcus admitted. It's not every day you help reshape galactic civilization. No, Zephyros agreed with a slight smile. But then again, we never did anything the easy way. Around them, the assembly hall showcased the miraculous diversity of the new galactic community. Former enemies sat side by side, their conflicts resolved through negotiation rather than conquest. Draconian delegates worked alongside coalition representatives, their presence a testament to the internal revolution that had transformed the Empire from within. Arya's voice joined their conversation through discreet speakers. The ceremony will begin in 10 minutes. I should note that Captain Vorthak has requested a private meeting with you after the signing, Marcus. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The dragon captain who had once hunted them across the galaxy had become an unlikely ally in the Empire's transformation, but their relationship remained complex. Any idea what he wants to discuss? Unknown, but his tone suggests it's personal rather than official business. The ceremony began with Speaker Tivara, the verdant collective representative who had been elected as the Assembly's first president, calling the session to order. Her harmonic voice carried across the chamber as she addressed the gathered delegates. Today, we formalize what began with the courage of individuals who chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, and hope over fear. The Universal Accord represents not just a peace treaty, but a new way of existing together among the stars. One by one, the major powers signed the document. The Draconian Empire's signature came from Prince Valros, Zephyros's older brother, who had inherited the throne when their father abdicated in shame after the revelation of Imperator's defection. The new emperor had proven surprisingly progressive, dismantling many of the Empire's most oppressive traditions. When Zephyros stepped forward to sign on behalf of the Coalition Council, the chamber fell silent. His signature on the document carried profound symbolism. A dragon prince who had been abandoned for weakness now helping to guarantee the rights of all beings deemed different or unworthy by traditional standards. With this signature, Zephyros said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I commit not just my own people but all species represented here, to the principle that diversity of thought, form, and capability strengthens rather than weakens our common civilization. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus noticed that not all faces in the chamber showed approval. Change had come rapidly, and not everyone was comfortable with the new order. There would still be challenges ahead. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself in a quiet observation lounge overlooking Unity Station's shipyards. The sight below was encouraging, ships from dozens of species working together on joint projects, their crews learning from each other and developing technologies that no single civilization could have achieved alone. Admiring our handiwork, Captain Vorthak's voice carried its usual gruff authority, but there was something different about the old dragon's demeanor. Marcus turned to face his former enemy. It's pretty amazing what cooperation can accomplish. Your people have adapted to the changes remarkably well. Vorthak moved to stand beside him at the viewport, his massive form somehow less intimidating than it had once seemed. Change was difficult for many of us. We had believed for so long that strength meant dominance, that weakness was a cancer to be eliminated. And now I watch my youngest daughter, born with the same condition as Prince Zephyros, excel at engineering tasks that would challenge our finest military minds. She sees patterns in stellar mechanics that our traditional thinkers miss entirely. The captain paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. You saved more than one life when you rescued the prince, human. You saved an entire way of thinking. Marcus felt the weight of that admission. We all saved each other, Captain. That's what cooperation means. Perhaps. Vorthak reached into his ceremonial robes and withdrew a small object wrapped in traditional draconian silk. I have something for you. A gift from the new emperor, but also from myself. Marcus unwrapped the object carefully, revealing a crystalline pendant that seemed to capture and reflect light in impossible ways. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but more importantly, he could sense the significance of the gesture. It's beautiful, Marcus said, genuinely moved. It's a heart of the Empire, Vorthak explained. traditionally given only to those of royal blood. Emperor Valros wanted Prince Zephyros to have it, but the prince insisted it belonged to someone else. I'm honored, but I'm not sure I deserve. You do, Vorthak interrupted firmly. You embody the best qualities we dragons have always claimed to value: courage, loyalty, and the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The difference is that you actually live by those principles, rather than merely speaking of them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Zephyros and Arya's mobile platform, a sleek android body that allowed her to interact more directly with physical beings. Are you two having a moment? Arya asked with what Marcus had learned to recognize as her version of humor. We were discussing the future, Vorthak replied, and acknowledging debts that can never be fully repaid. Zephyros moved to join them at the viewport, his gaze following a mixed cruise ship as it departed for deep space exploration. The future looks promising, but we still have work to do. The Accord is just the beginning. What's next? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. There are still isolated systems that haven't joined the coalition, species that fear contact with larger civilizations, and remnant imperial factions that resist the changes, Zephyros replied. The galaxy is vast, and not all of its inhabitants have heard that there's a new way to live among the stars. Arya's expression showed the kind of anticipation that Marcus associated with new challenges. I've been analyzing exploration reports from the Outer Rim. There are indications of previously unknown civilizations, some of whom may be facing their own crises. Marcus smiled, recognizing the familiar pattern. So we go help them. That's what we do. Indeed, Vorthak agreed. The strong protecting the weak, not for dominance but for the simple reason that it's right. As the four of them stood watching the bustling activity of Unity Station, Marcus reflected on how far they had all come from that day on Zirion Prime. A human custodian, a sickly dragon prince, an artificial intelligence, and a career soldier had somehow become the architects of galactic transformation. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, when I picked up that emergency signal 5 years ago, I thought I was just saving one life. You were, Zephyros replied. But sometimes saving one life is how you save everything else. The Second Chance, fully upgraded and bearing the insignia of the Coalition Diplomatic Corps, waited in the docking bay below. Her crew had grown to include representatives from a dozen species, but her mission remained the same: to go where others wouldn't, to help those who needed it, and to prove that the galaxy's greatest strength lay not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to preserve. As they prepared for their next mission, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the viewport and smiled. He was still a custodian at heart, still someone who believed that taking care of others was the most important job in the universe. The scale had simply gotten a bit larger. The Universal Accord was signed. The galaxy was at peace, and somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, other beings in need of rescue waited for the arrival of a ship called Second Chance. The work continued as it always had, one life at a time. In the end, the sickly dragon prince who was left to die had not only survived, but had helped save a civilization. And the human custodian who carried him to safety had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of strength is simply choosing to care when others choose to abandon. The galaxy had learned that lesson well, and it would never be the same again.